My name is officially John Robert Hogfeldt, but I've always gone by the name of Bob. Rockford, Illinois. June 1st, 1944. I was in college. I received a notice from the government that my number was up. We went to Camp Blanding, Florida for basic training. I believe it was about 17 weeks long, and we were stationed in the middle of Florida, not on the coast. It was very, very warm. Lots of little lakes, lots of snakes. It was not a very comfortable place to be in the summertime. Basic training, I don't recall that we were assigned to any unit at that time, although they did give us somewhat of a choice. And they read off different classifications of what you might be joining. And there was one that said intelligence and reconnaissance. And I thought, well, that would be nice to write home about, that I'm in the intelligence end of it. So I chose that. Little did I know that intelligence and reconnaissance, that they were the guys that preceded the other guys and scouted out the area. So that's what I ended up with. Next I went, they gave us leave, I think it was about 10 days at home, and then shipped us off to Camp Gruber, Oklahoma, mostly packing our bags to go overseas. No real duties. The seas were rough, and most of the guys were seasick, which was not a pleasant thing to watch. And I, however, got a little queasy, but I didn't really get sick. I remember all our meals were taken standing up at counters. The showers were salt water, which left you feeling more dirty than when you came. I don't remember. Well, I remember the food wasn't too bad. It was edible. Well, we came in on in landing craft and assembled outside the. The ships had to anchor. We didn't pull into a dock. We had to go in by landing craft. And we assembled on shore afterwards. And then we're ordered to take our duffel bags, which I might add were full of everything that we could take with us, and were very heavy. And we carried them up a long, long slope, about killed me. It was so heavy, I wish I hadn't taken all the stuff that I took. And we got to the top of this hill. They ordered us to put our duffel bags in a pile. Everybody throw them in a pile. That's the last I saw of my duffel bag until I got home after the war. I even had a fruitcake in it, which was still good. So that's the Army. The part that I saw was pretty intact. I did get to go downtown, and I remember I had a headache, and I wanted to get some aspirin, but I didn't know the French for aspirin. But I did find a pharmacy and went through all sorts of motions and talked to try to tell them I wanted some aspirin. And I finally got it out. The word in French for aspirin is aspirin. We were ordered to take which we thought was a little village. And it was not, it was going to be just a piece of cake. It turned out it wasn't. In fact, it was one of the battles, a real battle, and we had to withdraw, retreat. And so our first experience with being under actual fire was not very pleasant. It turns out I learned more about the war after I got out than when I did when I was actually in it. So in reading the magazine articles, it does describe that first encounter. I was scared to death. And of course you're under orders and you move forward when you were told to. And I moved to the rear much faster than I moved to the front. There was quite a bit of fire at the time. And I don't remember the statistics or ever really learned how many casualties we suffered at the time. BAR, man, bearing automatic rifleman. I think it was from the shoulder. Of course, you're laying down, which took a lot of the weight off. I carried what ammunition I could. It's probably why I have a bad back today. We were pulled back and we did guard duty around a small village, and which didn't comprise of much in the way of any action, except to get cold. It was cold at that time, very cold. And for a while we were quartered with a French family, which led us inside, which was great. And the man of the house insisted that before we go out on our so-called guard duty, that we have a shot of schnapps first. And I got to liking that schnapps. I think we were there about 4 or 5 days. And we had a little fun. We shot at rabbits and things like that. But as far as any combat experience, we experienced none at that time. They moved us both by walking and by truck. And at several points we got on a railroad car. I can recall one man who before was captured did go and leave and drank some French wine, and he drank way too much of it. And he got on this truck, I've forgotten where we're going, but he vomited and he lost his false teeth. So he had to go the rest of the war without dentures. We really didn't see many wounded at that time. Later on we did. Okay? But as we were moving up, all those things had been pretty well taken care of before we got there. Well, I remember that Christmas Eve we were able to get inside, which was nice, and gathered in a former munitions factory, and we sang carols, and I was one of the few that knew the words. And we had, they brought in, I'm trying to remember what we had to eat. I believe it was turkey, which was amazing that they could get food that close to the front. So we were there really just overnight, and they moved us out again. Saw airplanes, yes, and heard gunfire. There was artillery overhead very, very often. Didn't sleep a lot. I think most of us were able to sleep because we were tired. I can recall at one point where, you just laid on the ground, and I found a nice stone to put my head on. But we were dug in foxholes, and we were firing from that position. We did see German troops coming at us, and after we started firing, they left, and that was pretty exciting. We did were able to get behind one of the tanks at one time when we were going toward the front. And there was quite a bit of exchange of fire at that time. In basic training, they concentrated a lot on map reading. I never saw a map once I got over there. So I had very little knowledge as to where we were or really what we were doing at that time. We never took any prisoners. I was captured pretty early in the war. We were in a defensive position along the Motor River, M-O-D-O-R, I believe it is, which was a small stream. And we'd been there for several days. And it was cold. One thing that probably saved my life is that we did have the time to dig ourselves in along the edge of the forest. And taking a cue from some of the other men, we dug our foxhole in an L shape and covered part of that over with fallen timbers, logs, whatnot, and then put snow on top of that. And so it was pretty well, the L part of it was pretty well concealed. And surprising thing, we did have hot meals brought up to us at that time. We could hear the Germans in the distance all that time. We were given the opportunity to go to our command post, which was across a big field, open field. And we went around by way of the road and got inside where it was warm, and that was wonderful. But they had tried to establish, several men were trying to establish a listening post across this open field. And I believe it was 3 that were killed. Either in the, don't know if it's on the way over, I wasn't there at the time, but on the way over or the way back. And then the lieutenant in charge said, we've got to get that listening post established, and you, and I was one of them, go over and see what you can hear. So what are the Germans doing? And so it wasn't with a great deal of happiness that we went across this field under a lot of fire. And I can recall that there was snow on the ground, and you run a little bit, and then you hit the ground, and the snow would fly up and hit you in the glasses, and I couldn't see much. But it kept on going until we got to this little stream, this Motor River. And there was no real cover in this open field. So it got down in the stream, which was not deep, but it was flowing. And of course got all wet. Lay there for a while, trying to listen, and didn't really hear anything meaningful. But then our own artillery, which was supposed to be zeroed in on the enemy, instead got us, and so we were in the path, and the artillery hit pretty hard. So I would guess that we were probably in that position for, I would guess maybe 3/4 of an hour. And our artillery got so fierce that we decided we were doing no good. We were hearing nothing but our own artillery. And so we decided to go back the way we came, which was not by the road, but by the open field. And so we went back, and a machine gun with tracer bullets tracked us all the way back. And you could see these tracer bullets going by, and luckily they missed all of us. There were 3 of us. missed us, and we got back without any wounds. So I'm surprised that we came back without any casualties, but we did. So that was quite an experience. In training, you hear this, you run, you hit the ground, zigzag, run a little bit more, hit the ground. I didn't hit the ground much, I just ran as fast as I could. And luckily, I made it. So anyway, I got back and I was wet. I went back to our foxhole and got back into it. And then it was that night that things started leveling up. My foxhole buddy and I were, as it got dark, were firing off where we could actually see the Germans coming over the river. They'd built a makeshift bridge and were coming over the river down to our left flank at a pretty fair distance, but we could see them. And as we were firing at the Germans coming over this bridge, didn't realize that they were coming over, then circling behind us. And all of a sudden we knew that they were right on top of us. I ducked back into this covered portion of the foxhole. Ducked back into there. And very shortly afterwards, I heard my foxhole buddy, they were yelling at my foxhole buddy, and then he got pulled out of the hole. I'm surprised they didn't shoot him. But as they left, I heard them try to determine whether or not there was anyone else in the hole. And my foxhole buddy said, no, no, no. But they took an automatic weapon and sprayed the bottom of our foxhole. Luckily, I was back far enough so none of the bullets hit me. But one of their bullets hit the stock of my rifle and split that in half. And so that was the gun that I had when I was captured. Didn't know what to do, but except I thought, well, I'm in one piece. I think I better stay right where I am, because I was safe at the moment. So I did stay there all night. And at dawn, didn't hear anything. Got out of the foxhole and went up and down where our line used to be to determine whether or not there were any other GIs there. And there were not. And I should have been more careful, but not realizing that I had stepped into the German line, and they captured me at that point. Well, I was trying to think how I would get out of there without getting killed. That's about all that went through my mind.
All right.
Yeah, I didn't realize that they were that close to me. So my object was to see if there was anyone else there. As it turned out, I read afterwards that there had been an order to withdraw that never got down to our squad. And so we were kind of left as a holding force for the others to get out of there. So our squad was alone, and the others were captured before I was. So I was alone during the night, and was captured the next day. Yeah, they searched me, and at that time we were right in their encampment, and there was a tank in the middle of the road, and that was holding them up from getting by it, and they thought that I was the tank driver. and I'd never been inside a tank before. So I finally convinced them that I couldn't drive that tank off the road. I wish I could have, but I didn't. And yeah, they tried to take, yeah, this is the ring. They tried to take my ring off. It wouldn't come off, and I was afraid they're going to cut my finger off. But during this time, our artillery had opened up, and everybody sought cover, me among them. And so that all happened just after I was captured. They got me on my feet, put a rifle in back of me, to my back, then marched me off into along the woods. And it was cold, and I was wet from my experience in the river before. They had me walk, I was alone at that time, with my hands over my head like this, which let all the blood run down, and froze my hands. My feet were frozen too, but not as badly as my hands. But luckily, they kept me walking, which thawed my feet out after a while. So, but my hands were pretty bad, because they were wet to start with. And no gloves, they took my gloves. So my hands were, well, afterwards I would hit them together and it just sounded like a couple pieces of metal. They were pretty badly frozen. Afterwards they turned black, and the skin, most of it peeled. Never really received any medical attention. But I remember I was quite a while before I could pick anything out of my pocket, get my fingers limbered up to pick them out. I kept them next to my body as much as I could, and they healed. And at one point, when we were going back, when they were marching us along, I didn't know really where we were going, but a medic, a German medic, stopped and interrogated me, wanted to know if I killed medics. And I sure wasn't going to say yes, I did. Actually, I hadn't. But so then, after a bit, we kept on going. Put us in a barn-like structure with some other prisoners, without food or without water. They marched us through the German Black Forest, Baden, to a resort area called Baden-Baden. You weren't supposed to, but you'd grab a clump of snow every once in a while and put it in your mouth. I can remember, even though I was frightened, I remember the beauty of the Black Forest. And what they call it the Black Forest because the trees were so dense, it was almost like night. It was a beautiful place. And we could see villages off in the distance because a lot of it was high ground. In the midst of it, we crossed the Rhine River. And that was quite an experience because we crossed on a barge. And the barge was propelled by men walking along the shore. Now, the current would be going, of course, downhill. They would cross diagonally across. And they got us across the Rhine River that way. And the current really, once we got out in the current took you diagonally across the Rhine River. And that was quite an experience. This was, I think, at like dusk. We could see, but it wasn't. It was getting dark. And then we got to Baden-Baden, and they took us to a makeshift prison camp. The heat was out of oil drums, burning pine, and I can still smell that pine. We got ourselves warm, we got something to eat, and that was one of the best places I ever was in Germany. Whenever I smell that, I think immediately of the building that we stayed in and the fires that they had when they burned pine logs. The picture comes back. Before we left, they gave us some black bread, a chunk of it. And I looked at it, I thought, what am I supposed to eat this? I stuck it in my pocket. And after a while, it tasted pretty good. Yeah. But really, that's all the food we had on this march, and I don't really know how long it was, but it took us quite a while. We were pretty tired. And then they moved us, as I recall, it was by truck to a place called Schlammlager, which was near Ludwigsburg. We're on a train at one point. And our planes came and there was no identification on the railroad cars at all. They were supposed to, but they didn't. And strafed our train. The conductor on the train and the other train personnel left the train. They stopped the train and left it, and left the train to be strafed. And one of their bullets did pierce our railroad car. And I heard afterwards, and I don't know if it's true or not, that there were several that were killed. And so we learned after that if at all possible, and it did happen, no, it was when we were marching along, we weren't on the train. One of our planes came along and strafed the column of guys. I can't say column because we weren't walking in like you were marching in a parade or anything, right, walking along the road. And instead of running for cover, we almost unanimously decided to stay where we were and wave. And they didn't hit anyone. So then they moved us to Stalag VII A. And it was a former stable made of concrete. And I remember that pretty vividly because because of the war, all the windows were buttoned up. At night, you couldn't have any kind of light. And what I remember so vividly was I had to go to the bathroom real bad. And there are a lot of men in this place. And the only facilities for going to the bathroom were in one corner. It was a big vat. And it was dark. And I made my way down there and went to the bathroom. But then I got lost going back. And I had a terrible time. I was really frightened. I couldn't find anything. I would feel bunks. But I did finally find my bunk and got back. But that was kind of frightening because of the darkness. Of course, there was a problem all during the capture was trying to find things that could use like toilet paper. We had a propaganda drop by the Nazis, and boy, we scurried around for that propaganda they hit. Propaganda against the United States. We scurried around and gathered all that paper we could. And then it was after that that they moved us to Stalag VII A. And that was near Moosburg. I have a lot of experiences there. But, there was one faucet, and I learned afterwards that one faucet served about 500 men. And most of the time they had that faucet turned off. I had an accident in my pants, and the first opportunity I got in and I rinsed off my clothes. I hung my ODs Went the next morning to get them, and somebody had stolen them. So that was the first thing. So, so that was my underwear. That's right, was my underwear first. And I had to have something like a fool. I washed my ODs and hung them up, and they were stolen the next day. So the only thing that was left was this windbreaker. What do we call them? I've forgotten. Anyway, it's made of poplin, windbreaker material, which is very thin. And luckily that wasn't stolen. I didn't let go of those. I wore those day and night. And I still had them on when I was liberated. After a while, we did get other windbreaker type pants to put on. And that was given to me by the church, I think a number of years before I ever got into service. And I did take that with me, and it was a lot of comfort. I didn't have much choice because it was the only thing that I had to read. And I know I must have gone through and read it at least twice. So when I was first captured, they did search me and started to take that away. And then one of the Germans looked at it and said, "Prayer book," and gave it back to me. And I still have it. And as I said, I can't take the credit for the design of it. I did make it. I wonder today how I did such a good job on it, but anyway, I had plenty of time, it seemed, at the time. And that was the only eating utensil that I had. And it was very difficult to keep it clean. And I remember sometimes we'd put some greasy food in it, and to get that grease, took sand and dirt and scrubbed it out with that. And then when I got a chance to rinse it out, did that. In fact, when I got water, I would take and fill that cup and put it under my bunk so I'd have some water on hand. But water was very, very scarce. You're lucky to get at the faucet when it's still running, just one faucet. It's a shame to think that one of your own buddies would steal from you, but it happened. There was a so-called dispensary, but they had very little in the way of medicines, practically nothing. I had flea bites that got infected, flea bites and lice, they were infected. I think most of them were on me. And I did go to a medic at the time, but all they did is they took some paper-type bandage and wrapped him, and they didn't even have any salve of any kind to put on him. But they were pretty badly infected. We were interrogated, but at that time it was end of the war, close to the end of the war. And I don't think the Germans were about to do anything that they could probably get punished for later. They were not, did not go out of their way to help us anybody, but they were really not unkind. And they had very little to eat, and they had probably the same fleas and lice that I had, so they were going through a lot of bad times. I learned a little German, the necessary things. The mattresses were just filled with straw, and I got so that I couldn't sleep because of you'd feel these things bite. And I finally got to a point where I couldn't stand it, and I probably should have been shot, but I took my mattress, the bag and everything, out in the compound, and I lit fire to it, and I burned it. And then from that time on, I went to sleep on a picnic table. Wouldn't get back in my bed. And I remember I had to wait until there were some guys that played cards afterwards, and I have to wait till they got done with their card game before I could get on top of this picnic table and sleep. So, but it was better than the bunk. Usually every day when they did the roll call was the time of the day that my bowels would have to move. And they would always ask, where's, I guess they called me Hogfeldt then. And they'd have to admit that I was in the outhouse. So, the opportunity arose with some civilians along the fence. And I don't remember if he offered it to me or if I asked him about it. I really don't remember. But I ended up trading, and I believe it was cigarettes. And would do that when you could. I remember I traded for that knife, and I remember getting some razor blades. We did get some cigarettes, and we shared. There were four when we ended up. I think there were four guys that shared one package, which wasn't very much. I tried to keep clean by shaving when I could, using really just water and the blade, no holder, just using the bare blade and shaving. And the water that we used was, they called it coffee. It didn't taste very good, but it was wet. I remember using that to kind of wash up and shave. Yeah. We rode into Munich on a daily basis, and were forced to do some demolition work. The demolition work was either in filling up bomb craters. Well, that wasn't demolition, but it did keep us busy. Then we decided that we would, when the guards weren't looking, we would bury our shovels. And so, one by one, we got rid of our shovels. We buried them. And just a side note on that, one day the sun was out, and they gave us a little rest, as I recall. And our guard, who was a rather elderly guy, went to sleep. And one of the guys went up and got his rifle, and I want to say it's not the word dismantled it. Took it all, disassembled it and took it all apart as much as he could. And the guy woke up and was pretty surprised. Anyway, so anyway, we got rid of a lot of shovels. They bombed the area that we were working in, and we ran to cover. So that was quite an experience to see a bombing out in the open, see our planes bombing us. And there were a lot of men killed, and they stacked up their bodies like cordwood in a church afterwards. I do recall that at one time, I recall a couple of things. When we were out on working parties, that was near Munich, we were, I don't like to use the word hired, but I say we were ordered to go into an area that they had, where they had cut trees. They had done some logging, and we were to pick up all the branches that had fallen to the ground that weren't worth keeping as logs. And they gave us a lunch. Oh, was that good? And a bottle of beer. And I didn't have any kind of alcoholic beverage when I was overseas, except that one time. And I never knew that beer could taste so good. The potatoes, we would, when we could, the Germans stockpiled their potatoes along the railroad track. We went back and forth from worked on this railroad. And we'd dig down with our hands and get seed potatoes. And I suppose if we'd gotten shot, if we'd gotten caught, we probably would have been shot. You take the chance when you're hungry.
Yeah.
And we would take them back to camp and build little fires. Well, that's where part of my straw went for my mattress, to build little fires, and then heat those potatoes, and then eat them. So that gave us some sustenance. We'd been moved from Stalag VII A out into the country. I'm just guessing it was because the Allied forces were getting very close. And they quartered us in a barn, and with guards around it. And got the word that the Allied forces were very close. And I decided I better get myself spiffed up. So I got my helmet full of water and had a handkerchief, which I used as a wash rag, and washed my body as much as I could to get ready to get liberated. This was outside. There was tanks moved in, yes. And we were loaded pretty quickly onto trucks and then taken to a small airfield. We got on a C-47, and I had, I mentioned dysentery. C-47 had no bathroom facilities whatsoever. I remember a bucket that sat in the middle of the aisle, and I used that on the trip back to Le Havre. They flew to an airfield near Le Havre, and there was a Red Cross truck when we landed, and we did get donuts. And I thought to myself, where were you when I needed you? At that time, they were issued new clothes and showers, obviously. Oh, boy, I tell you. You don't realize. Well, I'd been in the same clothes all the time. Except I did get a pair of combat boots that didn't fit. And through the shoes that I had were shoe packs. And I did find a pair of combat boots along the way that fit me well enough to use. And so that's the only change clothes I had. But they deloused us, and they would take a big steam thing and spray. They didn't wash them. They just sprayed us with this disinfectant. And you put them back on again, as dirty as they were. Stayed there for 2 weeks. Well, we were assigned to the hospital. And I was among the walking, I hate to say walking wounded, no. Anyway, I could walk and could bring back a tray of food for one of the soldiers that wasn't able to walk. But instead of bringing back one, I usually brought back two. So I went through the regular chow line, and then got myself an extra tray when I brought the food for the other guy. So I put on a lot of weight. When I was liberated, they did weigh me. I've forgotten what it was, but it was around 100 pounds, from 153. Glad to be alive and glad to be where I was. They did give us postcards early on after capture, and we were able to. No, that postcard didn't get to them until just before I was home took all that time. And so they had the postcard along with my duffel bag and fruitcake. We got on a converted troop ship, and I remember the name of that one. It was John B. Hood. We had several tiers of bunks, actually canvas strapped to iron supports. And I think I was about third one up. And it took us 2 weeks to go back across the Atlantic. We were still in a convoy at the time, and we zigged and zagged all the way back. And one time we zigged when we should have zagged, and we ran into the ship in front of us, which was an aircraft carrier. And it made the movies. And they described it as a hole big enough to drive a Jeep through. It was enough of a jolt that it knocked me out of the bunk. I was in my bunk at the time. And I ran toward the gangway, I guess they call it. And I remembered at the time that I had forgotten my cigarettes. So I went back and got my cigarettes. And it turned out that they had closed off enough compartments on the ship so that we were not in danger of sinking, but for a while we thought we were. The food coming back had been loaded with food for our troops when it went over. It never got a chance to unload it. So we had a ship full of food, and we just gorged ourselves on the way back. We traded off taking care of the food, cooking the food, and serving it. And I can recall that most of my meals consisted of a full chicken French fried. And I weighed like 165 pounds when I got home. So it was just, shouldn't have done that, because I guess that I read afterwards that can kill you if you gorge yourself like that. Oh, glorious. Yeah. Remember seeing the Statue of Liberty, and that was quite a sight. They wouldn't let me go for a while because they wanted to check my blood pressure, and boy, I thought, the other guys were leaving, and here I was stuck until my blood pressure went down. I never had high blood pressure since. Well, I'll take that back. I have high blood pressure now, but not for a long time after that. So I should have written them. I should have called them when I got to Chicago. I thought, well, that's close. I might as well just get on the train and go home. So I got a train, went back to Rockford. It stopped at Rockford in those days. And I thought I probably should call them. No, I'm this close. I think I'll just go on home. So I got a taxi, walked in on my dad, and he about had a fit. He just, I didn't know what was going to happen to him, because he was so surprised. She was startled too, although she wasn't in the room when I walked in. So I think she was upstairs at the time and came down to hear what the commotion was. They didn't know for sure that they got a telegram afterwards that led them to believe that I was either dead or they surmised that I might have been captured. Yeah, my intention was always to finish college. Beloit College in Beloit, Wisconsin. I lived in a fraternity house. I wasn't really certain what I was going to do, but I had started some classes in psychology, and I found that to be what I thought was my calling at the time. It certainly made me more mature. I had joined a fraternity, and I didn't really fit into fraternity life after I got back. I was in charge of some of the training of the pledges, and I was not tuned to the idea of corporal punishment of pledges. So I didn't stay, I quit that position after a while. I just couldn't see doing things like that. And of course today it's a lot different, but back in those days that fraternity life was a lot different than it is today. And I know that I did better in my studies after I got back, much better. Of course, by that time I was married too, and she kept me at it. I was in a car riding with the boss of the pool. He was actually a football coach. And I looked to the side, and here was this girl walking along the sidewalk. And I could tell even at that distance, I was in the car, she's a pretty good looking girl. So I asked Chuck, the teacher that I was riding with, I said, boy, she's good looking. And he said, oh, I know her. He says, would you like a date with her? And I said, I sure would. So he fixed us up with a date. We went out with this former teacher and went up to Lake Geneva and had dinner, and that was the start of it. And then I got a fellowship at in Pullman, Washington, State College of Washington. I was a counselor to work my way through the fellowship. And that was a good experience. They did hire my wife as a house mother. We were in charge of 90 married couples. And we made a lot of friends. Well, the thought has never left me. Why did I survive and somebody didn't? And it still bothers me. Well, I think I appreciate everything more because of it than if I didn't experience that. Yeah, it kind of retreated to the back of my mind. It was always there. Sometimes something would trigger a memory. The best meals that we had after captured was sauerkraut soup. And to this day, I like sauerkraut. And I've always been, I never did find anyone that made sauerkraut soup since. But I can recall that just being so hungry and how good that sauerkraut soup tasted.
I'll have to make that.
I went to school with a man by the name of Chuck Hop. And they gave us eggnog to build up our strength. And he was going one way in the eggnog line, and I looked over, and here was my old buddy from high school going the other way in the eggnog line. He'd been in the Air Force. And I guess along that line, talking about running into people, I did have a reunion with my foxhole buddy. Well, that wasn't too long ago. I lost track of him completely. We didn't really run into each other, but they moved him around. He was in different camps. He ended up at one stage in Stalag VII A. So we were both in the same camp at one time, but never really ran into each other. I was in the kitchen one day and the phone rang. A man on the other end said, are you Robert Hogfeldt? I says, yes. And he went on to relate different things. He says, were you In Germany, in the war? Yes. And he went on. I didn't really know what he was after. Then he finally told me that his father, his name was Tim, the father's name was Lyle, his name was Tim, that he'd been doing some research, and they've been looking for me ever since the war. And I was just so happy to hear from him. He didn't know if I had lived through it, and I didn't know if he had lived through it. But anyway, I did. He lives in Fairfield, Ohio. And Penny and I went to Florida one year, and decided that wasn't too far out of the way, so we stopped to see him and his family. And it was a nice reunion. Well, he got through it fine. He has a lot of health problems now. We call each other on the phone now and then. And I'd love to go back again and see him. Maybe someday I will, when I get old.